Brandon Collins never believed that his end would come with a glass of Chardonnay and his wife's sarcastic snort from the client's living room. Life seemed perfect. Brandon, a senior systems architect at a prestigious consulting firm, was thriving in the tech industry, and he and his wife Naomi, a feisty customer service representative, lived the kind of life many could only dream of. Their home in suburban Connecticut was the epitome of success, and their two children, 13-year-old Caitlin and 11-year-old Jonah, were growing up healthy and happy. Now their friends raised their glasses at weekend barbecues to their seemingly perfect life. But the perfection was only a facade, and masks have a nasty habit of slipping at the most inopportune moments. That Thursday was even more tense than most Thursdays when CEO Philip Garrison asked Naomi to come into his glass-walled office. When she emerged with a broad smile on her unreadable face and an old-fashioned envelope in her hands, Brandon felt his stomach knot again as he walked past her and headed for the elevators to catch up with the others. "What's that?" he asked a minute later, cornering her in the break room where she was pouring almond milk into her coffee. Naomi pouted, took a few sips, then replied, her face immediately brightening. "It's an invitation from Philip, or rather, Vincent Caldwell." Brandon frowned. Vincent Caldwell, the obnoxious tycoon who dabbled in everything from technology to luxury resorts. Naomi had been his client manager for 6 months, and she glowed when she talked about him, about his charm, his genius. "He's throwing a private party on his private island," she blurted out, and you could hear her smile. "Only 5 couples, key clients, and their wives, and we're invited." Brandon's mind raced. "Spouses?" he blurted out before he could stop himself. Naomi paused and looked around. "Yes, Vincent invited the 2 of us, said it would spice things up a bit." Brandon believed he didn't like the way she said it. Too eager, too rehearsed. But he nodded and pushed the disturbing thoughts away. "They're probably taking us to some island." 2 weeks later, Brandon stepped off a private jet onto an island that could have been built in a billionaire's imagination. White sand, swaying palm trees, a mansion that made their own house look like a shoebox. Everything around them screamed luxury. When we landed on the runway and Vincent Caldwell greeted us, I noticed a charisma in him that I had only seen before in truly wealthy people. He was 2 inches taller than Brandon, or as tall as Vincent could remember him, with gray temples, trying too hard to look like Durko, who had shaved the back of his head that week, as if his life had eaten away at his urban charm like another dish in an overcrowded restaurant that had been left under the lamp for too long. Vincent lingered on Naomi for a second longer than necessary as he and Brandon politely sized each other up. "Naomi," Vincent said, taking her hand in his and squeezing it gently, "you're even more beautiful in the sunlight." Brandon's stomach twisted when Naomi laughed, and there was a hint of flirtation in her voice. They couldn't see him standing there. Later, in her bungalow, Naomi changed into a red dress with such an open back that it had no place in this part of the world and in a style Brandon had never seen before. Her hair was the perfect shade it would have been if she hadn't slept all night, and her eyes sparkled, but not for him. "You look," he began, but she cut him off, glancing at herself in the mirror. "Don't," she said sharply. "Let's not make this awkward. This is work, so act like it." At dinner, Vincent sat next to Naomi and was completely charmed. He laughed at her jokes, touched her hand when she said something interesting, leaned in too close to her. On the other side of the table sat Brandon, who, as his hedge fund manager's wife explained, was involved in a special kind of business when it came down to specifics. Naomi was already completely enthralled, leaning against Brandon and looking at him with a languid, dreamy gaze. "He's incredible, isn't he?" she whispered. Brandon didn't answer, and as he sat there watching the waves break, he felt a slight pang of melancholy. The man who had been, the man Naomi loved, was gone. The next day, Vincent called Naomi into his office for a private conversation. Accompanied by a security guard with a granite chin, Brandon walked into Vincent's office. The conversation was direct. "You love your wife," Vincent said with a cold, calculating gaze. "I just believe she's the one, her energy, her essence. I mean it. I love being here with her for a long time, alone, close." Brandon blinked, momentarily numb. Vincent didn't flinch. "Continue reading. Before you get angry, this is not an insult, it's an offer. $200,000 in your account right now. I get Naomi for the weekend. No strings attached after that. You walk away richer." Brandon was stunned. "You're joking." "Yes, of course," Vincent said, smiling like a chandelier. "I'm offering you a chance to secure your children's future, to patch the hole in the roof Naomi's been talking about for 3 years, so I can breathe freely instead of worrying about bills." Brandon froze. "Does Naomi know about this?" But Vincent's face was all smiles. "She agreed. She said she promised me she wouldn't do it until you said it was okay." The door creaked and Naomi tiptoed in, beaming and blushing like a tomato. "Brandon, don't," she whispered pleadingly. "Just listen. It's not what you think. It's just a deal. Nothing more." Brandon's heart broke. Here was the woman he had fallen in love with, the woman he had built a life with, and now she was selling herself to some other stupid man for money. "Get out," he said in a hollow voice. Numi persisted and refused to leave, and it took an additional threat from Seth's security consultant to push her out of the room. He just sat there alone, struggling to contain his rage. It was too painful to be outside the door. He spent the next 12 hours wandering from one end of the island to the other, with only whiskey and silent rage keeping him alive. But when he returned to the bungalow, Naomi's bed was untouched. The air was saturated with perfume, a bitter reminder of what he had once felt and possessed. He sat on the bed with a bourbon in his hand, staring at the wall, aware that every beat of his heart was consuming him even more. "She doesn't even regret it," he muttered under his breath. At that moment, the first signs of something dangerously explosive began to smolder inside him, something deeper and more enduring than petty revenge. He wasn't going to give up that easily. The next day, when the others flew off to brunch, he wasn't on the private jet, so he bribed one of the island's freight forwarders to hide him on a cargo ship. The journey back was long and cold, which suited Brandon just fine. He didn't even change out of the clothes he had worn the night before. The house was empty. Naomi had taken the children to her parents' house. Brandon wandered around their shared home, looking at everything that had once been dear to Naomi, her dresses, jewelry, photos from their wedding. He fell into a blind rage and began tearing everything from its place and throwing it into a bonfire in the yard. When the pit was full, he doused the pile with lighter fluid and set it on fire. Brandon took a swig from the bottle of whiskey he was holding as their life together turned to ash. "No one will sell me and walk free," he muttered into the night. The next day, Naomi arrived with the children. Seeing the charred entrance to the yard, she dropped her suitcase in bewilderment. "Oh my God," she said quietly. Brandon, calm as a cucumber, came out of the garage. "You put yourself up for sale for $250,000, he said in an icy voice. "Consider this your receipt." Naomi slumped in shame. "They don't have any money," she whispered. Vincent lied. He never apologized for it. But if you asked him, it was a superficial offer, a test of my character. In Madrugada, I also wrote, "What happened to me was that Guy later told me that the offer wasn't even real. It was a test of my character. He took me off the client, didn't do the interview, and didn't take me back at the firm. I'm blacklisted." Brandon continued to stare at her, unmoving. "So, just for free?" "For us, for the kids," Naomi said, her voice trembling. "Don't you dare," he snapped. "Don't pretend it wasn't personal. Everyone here knows it was personal." Weeks passed. The tension escalated into open hostility. Brandon quickly hired a lawyer, filed for divorce, and demanded full custody of the child. The man who reportedly spoke to Naomi shortly before her death in the arms of her lover, Vincent, said, "It's a blow because she secretly recorded some of the conversations she had with Naomi in the last minutes before she died at Vincent's hands." His lawyer called it moral leverage. Naomi called it blackmail. "You're calling me a monster," she said. Brandon's face was impassive. "No, Naomi, I'm just showing you the version of yourself that you showed me in court." He was branded a poor husband and then a suffering parent. Naomi was fragile, struggling, earning no money, and with no prospects of returning. By the court's decision, he would have sole custody, and Naomi would only be able to see her daughter under supervision. Brandon didn't gloat after the hearing. There was no need. Naomi and her lawyer walked past, and he leaned toward me and whispered, "You gave this to me. I just didn't know how to use it." Naomi didn't answer. Her eyes were completely empty, and Brandon knew that this was far from over, that this was only the beginning. Naomi Alvarez, a.k.a. Naomi Collins, stared at the double doors through which her ex-husband had walked, now long gone to the other side, where he lived for a few more moments in the world of the living. Mr. Garcia could still hear the judge banging his gavel, and the sentence sounded like a foggy finality. The same words Brandon had thrown at her so she wouldn't forget them rang in her head. "You gave me the knife, and I just learned how to use it." She had failed. And worst of all, he had used all the tools she had given him. Her life collapsed in an instant. Gone were the luxury car, the glass-walled office with a view of the skyline, the brunches with clients who admired her. Now she lived alone in a one-room apartment with stains on the ceiling and a front door that swelled when it rained, and worked in a department store closet where she labored until dawn, earning a living until her back ached and her fingers froze. Her old friends disappeared. Even those who had once envied her had run away or grown cold. She overheard whispers in cafes, but what tormented her most were the rumors about her daughter, Caitlin. She didn't respond to Naomi's messages, and Naomi left voice messages, not knowing if she would ever hear them. Once she tried to go to John's football game, but when Brandon saw her, he leaned over and whispered something to John. Her son didn't even wave at her. He turned away, and Naomi believed her heart would break, but it didn't, at least not yet. She drank another bottle of cheap wine in her apartment, burning her tongue as if to punish herself. One mistake, and that was it. It was the moment she kept returning to in her mind, the hesitation in Vincent's eyes when he proposed, the lie she told herself that everything would work out, that they would figure it out somehow. But some boundaries once crossed become not just invisible, they are burned into the ground. It was a rainy Tuesday when Naomi picked up the phone and called Charlotte, the name Vincent had given Brandon as a decoy. Naomi had long suspected that Charlotte's smooth exterior hid something sinister, but she was the last remnant of her former life. "I need help," Naomi said, her voice trembling. "Vincent never paid me. He finally said that $250,000 was all he was going to give me. He said it was never real, that there was no contract, that it was just a role. I've been fired and blacklisted. I'm desperate." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "That's when Charlotte said," came the icy voice, "You were never anything special, Naomi. You were just the next one." The line went dead. Naomi screamed, a guttural, wild scream that tore her apart. He had thrown it at her. She threw it across the room and let it shatter just as her life had shattered. Suddenly, she collapsed to the floor, sobbing. But through her tears, something was happening to her. Something dark. Something different. The next day, Naomi called the office and said she was sick. But then she sat down at her laptop and began restoring her digital files, all the emails, all the calendar invitations that were still circulating on the company system. She saved voice messages, text messages, especially the ones that were meaningful, facts that Vincent had mentioned that, if read in a certain way, could point to his guilt. She was aware of the non-disclosure agreement she had signed, but Vincent had contacted her informally and thrown her a bone, albeit in the form of a thinly veiled response. She compiled a timeline of events and a formal complaint and sent them to the state bar, the firm's ethics department, and journalists eager for a piece of the scandal. Naomi no longer wanted money. She wanted to destroy Vincent. Brandon, on the other hand, seemed to be thriving. He found a bigger house, his consulting business was doing well, and he hired a private tutor for Caitlin and John, telling them that their mother was ill and mentally unstable. The children didn't ask any questions, but behind the scenes, Brandon was not sleeping. Every night he replayed the moment he hit Vincent in the face. When she walked out of the courtroom, he imagined Naomi, broken, 92 years old but not defeated. He knew she was on to something, and he was right. 2 weeks later, you read headlines that looked something like this. Billionaire offered money for sex with client's representative during corporate retreat. Vincent Caldwell under fire after leak of internal messages. Ethical violations pile up. Former employee claims she was fired for refusing sexual favors. The story spread like wildfire. Naomi's name wasn't revealed, but people were wondering. Her photo was printed in tabloids. Some mocked her, others praised her as a heroine. Vincent was called in for questioning. The firm distanced itself from him. Philip Garrison resigned the following month. Hiding in his spare kitchen, Brandon sipped espresso and read the news. Soon he couldn't hide the smile that turned into a smirk. She was fighting back. He admired her for it, but he wasn't going to let her win. Vincent was finished. His own investors had turned on him, and he had stepped down as CEO of 2 companies. Naomi responded with nothing but a lion's roar in the media. No interviews, no TikTok posts, no blog articles. She unleashed a barrage of violence against him, but there was one caveat. Naomi never got her life back. No one hired her, and I'm still unemployed and alone. Exposing him didn't save her. It branded her. One afternoon, Brandon ran into Naomi at the supermarket. She was wearing a cashier's uniform, her eyes downcast, slightly trembling as she bagged someone else's groceries. She didn't notice him. He didn't speak to her. But he couldn't get her out of his head when he got home, not in a I'm in love way, but in a what's happening to her way. What do you see when everything is lost, when you have nothing, when you can't stop? Meanwhile, Caitlin had changed. She had become quieter, more distant. She was rougher with John. Brandon could see by the way she looked at him, by the way she seemed to be searching his face for something she didn't like, that she wasn't herself. And then one night she asked him, "Dad, did you show anyone the video of Mom?" Brandon froze. He had shown the video to a friend when he was drunk and angry, and maybe that friend had shared it. He denied it. "I would never do that. That video was personal. Who told you that?" Caitlin looked at him dismissively, got up, and left the room. The following week, he was served with papers. Naomi had sued him for defamation and unlawful distribution of a private recording. Brandon laughed as he read them, but inside he wasn't so sure he would win this round. Naomi didn't know how to defend herself when it came to anyone else. She played to attack, so the court summons came quickly. Naomi was no longer broken. Instead, she was playing her cards. It was a trial that went unnoticed. No press, no open court. Naomi took the stand and struggled to hold back tears. She didn't play the victim. All she did was tell the truth, that she had made a mistake and Brandon had taken advantage of her. He didn't humiliate her the way people usually do to punish someone. He did it for his own pleasure. She said he showed the video to people, including Caitlin. Brandon felt his heart sink. After that, she never looked at him the same way again. The judge ruled in Naomi's favor. Brandon didn't go to prison, but he had to pay a large sum in compensation and undergo therapy. Worse, he lost joint custody of his daughter. Naomi never returned her daughter, but she did get custody. When sentencing Brandon, the court noted that he was vindictive, domineering, and had allowed his anger to destroy his role as a father. Months passed. Brandon's business went into decline. His reputation suffered. Naomi found a job at a non-profit organization. It didn't pay much, but it allowed her to make a living. She began to rebuild her relationship with Caitlin and John, not completely, but enough. One night, Brandon stood outside Naomi's new apartment. He didn't come to beg or argue, he just wanted to see her face. She slowly opened the door. They looked at each other without saying a word. And then Brandon said the three hardest words of his life. "You won." Naomi shook her head. "Number, we both lost, but at least now I can breathe." Brandon gave her a sign and left.